Cheers.
Cheers, my dear.
Welcome to the stuffed sandwich. The sandwich years series of conversations is what we're calling it. Um, Both Mel and I run our own businesses, and we are finding ourselves increasingly stuffed into a sandwich when it comes to our caring responsibilities. Elderly parents, dependent children, a business to run, and then that little sideline issue of perimenopause to add into the mix. So I'm Lesley Waldron. I'm an integrative women's health coach. I support women through the peri to post menopause transition in feeling wildly well. So well supported, well connected, well nourished, and well resourced. That's what I do. And I have a mother in her 70s who has Alzheimer's, who lives about 10 miles down the road, and I have kids at home aged 10 and 12. So juggling all of those things feels like a little bit like we're a bit squished into a sandwich. And Mel?
Hello. So, my name is Mel Wakemen. I am a registered non-diet nutritionist. So, none of the kind of faddy stuffs. And I work particularly with people who are chronic dieters, experience poor body image or body dissatisfaction. I also work with those who have disordered eating and eating disorders. I help them on their healing and recovery journey. So while I'm doing this as my day job, then I have my 10-year-old who, particularly over this part of the year, kind of just helping him get settled into year 6. I have my mum who lives about 2 minutes away. She does now because we moved house. And I have my in-laws who also live about 2 minutes away. So that has its pros and cons, and I'm very grateful to be here. But I am the closest sibling and sibling-in-law to be able to help them meet some of their needs. I'm menopausal. I have a husband who has chronic health problems, and I have 2 very needy dogs, which are entirely my own choice, but they kind of add in to the layers whereby I don't think there's physically any more room in the sandwich.
Mm-mm.
It's going to end up tits up if I try and put even a little sprinkling of salt in there. So that's what we're dealing with, Lesley.
It is. And what has been really interesting about our conversations and why we thought it would be really good to share this to a wider audience is that what we're really good at is supporting our clients in their own self-care, and that with this extra strain, I've certainly come very close to total burnout in the past prior to this career. But I'm really conscious that burnout is something that we could really easily experience here. And so self-care needs to be a priority. Otherwise, all of those responsibilities end up falling on the floor in a right mess of an open sandwich that just needs to be swept up and put into the bin. And then nobody benefits from that, right, Mel?
Oh, my dogs would. My dogs would
The
eat.
dogs would like, okay, the dogs would benefit.
But there's this thing around, as you just touched on, this is some of the difficult work that we help our clients with, kind of juggling the whole of their lives and discovering themselves and finding out ways in which they can find good health and bring happiness into their life and so on. And I'm really crap at it. And there's a real kind of, I am admitting it more now, but should I admit this, that I don't practice what I preach? But then there's a part of me that goes, well, we are human, Lesley. We are human beings. There is no such thing as being perfect. And this is the reality, isn't it? Like I didn't sign up for this life. This wasn't what I was expecting. No one taught me and prepared me for this bit.
No, and I think that's the same. And I have had so many conversations with people who are wearing similar shoes to mine. How many analogies can I get going on in this? Sandwiches and shoes. For whom similar shoes to mine, who are facing the same issues, and there is a tendency, and I think it is partly kind of societal, cultural, to expect that as women, of course, we can juggle all of these caring responsibilities, and that martyring ourselves to the care of our families in both generations is our role. And I don't agree with martyring ourselves and putting ourselves through pain in order to do this. And what I've noticed about the beginning of this journey of mine is that when I prioritize myself and allow myself to creep back up the to-do list, my own self-care, is that everything else is easier. The parenting, the support for my mother, the juggling act of, there's endless forms and appointments that you didn't, there comes a point, isn't there, where you have forms and appointments and things for your children and for your parents at the same time. How do you prioritize this conflict, And it's so prioritizing ourselves becomes a really, really important part of that. And in our conversations, we've talked a bit about how do we recognize the signs of when it is that we need to make ourselves that priority again, when we've lost sight of that. And I think that would be a really useful thing to kind of share here.
Lesley, how do you know when the wheels have fallen off?
So there's a shortness. So there is definitely a shortness of temper that goes on. I stop prioritizing my own movement. So movement is magic for my mental and my physical health, and supports sleep and all of those other things. And if I stop exercising, then it all goes a little bit horribly wrong. So when I stop making time for that, when I notice myself, I think we go, talking to the right person here, when I notice myself creeping towards the biscuit tin more regularly, because I'm running on adrenaline and cortisol and I feel like I need sugar all the time. When my son, who's very sensitive to my energy, stops sleeping well, so he is picking up on my overwhelm, and that whole feeling tired all of the time. And again, takes me to the biscuits. Yeah. Biscuit jar again, feeling tired and lethargic. And that shows me that's a really important sign that I'm not prioritizing my well-being enough. And then I have and that tiredness comes with low mood and increased anxiety, all of which feels very uncomfortable. How about you, Mel?
Well, sometimes it can be quite spectacular.
Mm-hmm.
I am there's an element of I'm a people pleaser for sure, and I'll keep going and I'll keep going. And I often in denial for quite some time. And so what tends to happen is I get really exhausted. I kind of peak and then I'm running on adrenaline and I crash. And so with that, it's just kind of intense tiredness, really ratty. I get quite ragey. So I had quite a recent experience when I had to when we moved house, trying to get my broadband connected up. I nearly threw the phone. And I apologize for my language. I apologize, but it just wasn't good enough. But I find it very difficult to contain those emotions when they start to bubble up. I also get incredibly forgetful.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, my memory's not great anyway. Like I have a real scatterbrain, but it's like I'm sitting at looking at my husband like I was this morning, and I just heard, and I was looking at him, and he went, "Is it?" And I went, "Is it what?" He said, "I just asked you, is football training on tonight?" Didn't hear. I kind of looked at him.
Wow. Yeah.
Yes, it is on tonight. That's for him to do, so that's quite good. So but then I also notice that as I get into this discomfort of my anxious brain and my anxious body kicking off, I then have to go and do stuff. So my husband sees me tidying up and faffing around about him and following around and picking up things after him and just really annoying him, and just like he's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm yes, and no, I'm not. So it's often after the event. I'm somebody who's very self-aware, but I think when you're in that sort of anxious zone and you're trying to cover all your bases, because if I do all of that, then everything will be okay, hopefully. I don't come up to breathe and notice.
And breathing is quite essential to life, isn't it? It's like we can't do all of the things if we don't allow ourselves to breathe, both physically breathe, but also mentally breathe and give ourselves space. One of the things I've started doing, and this has been a learning phase for me over the last sort of 9 months or so, probably longer than that, a year, is that to kind of preempt the exhaustion. So to book things in that give me space. So whether that is, so before term started in September, I went on a restorative yoga retreat. And knowing that the beginning of term will be very busy, but also that my mother will have been in Ireland with my sister for 3 weeks. And when she comes back, often that's a very difficult time. So I wanted to make sure that I had mental and physical rest so that I could cope with that. And I've also booked a weekend away with a friend at the end of November, knowing that the December, roller coaster will start, and I need that time and space before we get to that level of potential exhaustion. So that's kind of almost like trying to take a bit of a prophylactic approach, which isn't always easy. It doesn't need to be as much as a weekend away, although it can be very helpful, because then delegation is key here, and that's quite hard. But then I will have to say my siblings live overseas, and I have step siblings in the country, and I will just let them know that I'm away so that they check in with my mother. And I might book in a little bit more care. My mum has carers going in now, which I know is an issue for some people where their parent won't accept that. And my mother's resistant, but accepting now. So I might book in a little bit more support, but there's a bit of delegation that needs to go on in order to give me that space. But I don't know about you, when I know I've got that space, I feel better even before I've done it.
I know exactly what you're saying, and I'm nodding here going, yes, I need to do more of this. And funny enough, I have things planned. I tend to go through cycles in terms of I kind of reach the kind of collapsed phase, and then I go, right, I need to put some more things in place. So I've got a nice little crochet workshop to go to in a couple of days' time. So it's like 2 hours out for me, which is great. And I'm starting to meet up with more friends again. I tend to get quite introverted when I'm kind of in this space. I don't have the capacity to do it. I'm also just forgetting what you just asked me.
So I create space in advance. Yeah.
But what I find, and this may be kind of how my brain is working, but I get quite stressed before I do the thing.
Oh, really?
In terms of, have I got time for this? I think what worries me most is my capacity.
Yes.
Do I have the capacity to do this? And sometimes I have ducked out because it just felt too much. So I have to be really sensitive to what capacity I have at the time, as to maybe who I meet, how long it's for, but absolutely agree in terms of having, if it's once a fortnight or once a month, whatever you've got capacity for, to have something to look forward to, because I absolutely feel better.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well done.
It's just like, it's kind of like pulling the plug and unplugging. And it's quite nice to be able to go and do something and go, right, I'm not clock watching.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be back at such and such a time. I'm just going out and we're going to have a nice time, and then I'll be back later, and just not being accountable.
And I think sometimes that's also a bit of a hangover from the early years of motherhood, where you really needed where that time, it felt hard to go away for a period of time without kind of having everything balanced. Or perhaps this was just me. And just as the kids are getting older, where that doesn't matter if I can go out for the day and I know that they'll all have a great time. Now, with this extra dependency, it can almost feel like I'm starting to get a little bit more freedom and flexibility, and then having a dependent parent brings brings it all in a little bit more. And this stress that we're talking about, I mean, it just means that we are kind of we end up hyper vigilant and hyper anxious. Our hormones are a little bit all over the place. So I'm holding on to being in my mid-40s for as long as I can. Might be defined as late 40s, but I'm in my mid-40s. I still have a reasonably regular menstrual cycle, although that's changing. And cycle tracking is an amazing resource for me, so that I know that there's about a week to 10 days in the month where my stress resilience is really low. And where I'm more likely to get very angry or anxious, or I'm not going to sleep very well unless I manage my self-care well. But I also know that those, if I'm needed for appointments, or to take my mother somewhere, or to go and fill her fridge, or whatever it is I'm needed for, I have to manage my resources even better in those 10 days. And that self-awareness is really useful, so that I can actually go, well, do you know what, I'm just going to go and do the thing. But I'm not going to hang around, because I know that it's quite likely that I might have various buttons pushed. But I will go and do the thing, fulfill my obligation. And then for me, I will quite often go for a swim. Where my mum lives, there's a marine lake. And I like to go for a little chilly swim, which just kind of resets my resets. It's like a reset button in terms of my stress levels and clarity of thinking and all of that kind of thing. It's like having a 250-meter long infinity pool looking out over the estuary. Is beautiful. So that self-awareness, knowing where I am in my cycle, helps me to manage my resources and my stress resilience. And then putting in things that support me is really important there.
So you taught me about the cycle tracking, and I found it incredibly helpful in terms of looking at how my energy kind of shifts and changes, and mood, and my productivity changes. So I then started to, and I'll be honest, it's kind of wavered off, but I then planned in a lighter week with my work, with my business. So in that premenstrual into the week of my period, I wouldn't kind of commit myself to networking. I wouldn't do things that really weren't necessary. It was like seeing my clients and exactly. And that really helps. And I'm thinking, again, I'm human. I kind of fell out of it, and I go back into that. It's like, well, I don't need to reinvent the wheel. That's what works. But that sort of time to breathe, to allow some headspace so that we can reconnect with ourselves is so beneficial, because it's then I often realize how tense my body is. If I can just unwind a bit, I can kind of come back into my body. And I notice that, you know, my jaw is clenched. I'm a clencher, not a grinder. I get tension in my shoulders. I hold my body quite rigid. It's like, okay, then I'll bring back in. And again, I go in waves, but with my yoga. I used to be very, very active. I used to be a bit of a compulsive exerciser. It wasn't healthy. So again, I'm very conscious of my energy. And for me, I walk the dogs, and my yoga is my way to calm my mind and to mechanically relax my body. And that just, it is like a reset. For me to do that.
And well done. And I mean, with the cycle tracking, we all do that. We all fall off and come back again. Even I do. So it's just I find it really helpful. But what I can imagine is somebody listening to this might be really resistant to this idea of slowing down, because life feels so full. So that actually it feels like, well, I haven't got the capacity to do these things for myself, to take that half an hour, 2 hours weekend. And I think what I'd like to say to that is that actually sometimes you need to explore that and see if it is really true, that you haven't got that time. And it may well be true. And if you can't take that hour, 2 hours, then even taking sort of micro breaks during the day can be really helpful. I had a client who described her job as feeling like she was building a plane in midair. And there just didn't feel like there was any space during the day. She was working ridiculously long hours to do anything. And so the first thing that we had her do was in order to try and get back out of fight or flight before each meeting that she was going to, was to take 10 deep breaths. No counting or anything like that, but just to take a breath regularly. And it's amazing how you combine that with having a regular glass of water and 10 deep breaths, and you're on your way to supporting your body in a really positive way. I don't know if you've got anything else that you would add to that.
I think I can very much relate to the feeling kind of stuck and resistant, because when we are in that place of overwhelm, then the idea of even doing one thing seems impossible. But also, if your memory isn't great and you've got brain fog, or you're just pieces of information fall out of your head, even the idea of going, oh yeah, I must remember to do those breaths when I do the meeting.
Yeah.
It's taking those tiny steps. For me, I suppose particularly in the work I do, when there's resistance to kind of introduce things that will be helpful, it's usually because there's an element of safety that isn't there.
Yeah.
So it feels too scary or too much to do that. So it is those tiny things where it may well be what would help in this moment. So I kind of think, well, so things are really, really busy. So what I've started to do, for example, is make sure nothing is back to back in my diary. Nothing is back to back. Oh, we had a little pause there. That's okay. Yeah. So nothing is back to back in my diary. So I have breathing time, so that when I finish an appointment or a call, it's like I will make myself get up. I will go and make a cup of tea. I'll breathe while the kettle is boiling. So it's the tiny little things that might just help calm your nervous system down, so that then your more logical thinking brain can come back in. Hopefully, if it's recording, Lesley, it will capture what I've said.
I think so. I think it's my internet connection.
You were intently listening just then.
Okay. So taking those small spaces can be really, really helpful. And I think that was really, I'm pretty sure that Mel was sharing wisdom, even if I didn't hear it right then. Because one of the things with being in this particular phase of life where you're feeling like a stuffed sandwich, is that your nervous system ends up kind of a little bit stuck in fight or flight or freeze. And so these small steps that you can take can help just take you a step out of that, to step away from that.
Can I also add something else, Lesley?
Oh, yes, please.
And I think, when there's all this overwhelm and we go into kind of maybe the overthinking and getting frozen and stuck in that place, is to think, right, okay, I'm going to write down, I'm going to do a brain dump. I'm going to try and get it out of my head and off my chest one way or another. So things that I've done before are kind of writing out all of my worries, no matter how kind of trivial or pathetic you might think it is, it's a worry. So as well as the big stuff, put the small stuff down. And once you can do a list, and then maybe you can kind of cross out the stuff, if you're really honest with yourself, what you don't have control over.
Yeah.
And I think when we're thinking about how we're maybe looking after our dependent kids or our parents, we really have to think about what we are not in control of, what we're not in control of, any sort of change in behaviors or symptoms or their needs. But in terms of what we're in control of, what we're not in control of, then maybe reevaluate the things that we are in control of in terms of what feels the most important thing, what's like your biggest worry, and what thing might you then have to do or make happen in order to help you feel a little bit sense of relief with that. And that may be the really difficult stuff. That might be, as I did, I had a really difficult conversation with my brother in terms of it wasn't very well thought out, and I probably would have done it thinking it out a little bit more. It was very much a relief, a
Yeah.
release of everything that I was feeling, but I needed to express what I was feeling and all the things I was doing. And so being able to talk about these things, if you've got a safe and trusted partner that, you know, that you rely on, then please use them, or your friends, like we have done. We have connected through this by sharing and going, not necessarily in terms of to problem solve all of this, but just,
No.
God, yeah, me too.
Yeah. And that's really, really powerful. I do actually have a little WhatsApp group with my brother and sister and two of my step siblings. And we don't use it that often. It's how I ask for help and support in decision making. But every now and then, we will, on a Sunday morning that complies with everybody's time zones, have a conversation that's just kind of a bit of an update. And I walk away from those conversations with nothing's shifted off my plate, but I feel lighter and more grounded and more able to cope. And the same goes for conversations with friends like you and with others who are going through similar things. I've actually found another cold water swimmer pal who's in a similar position, and that, you know, that's amazing therapy. And I would definitely suggest, there's lots of us out here in similar spots, and it does help with managing that overload and overwhelm, which can be really hard.
I mean, we're not taught how to do this, are we? And I think genuinely we are one of the first generations who are feeling the intensity of these sandwich years, particularly as we've been working, you know, owning our own businesses, going through menopause when no one ever talked about it before. It's not a failure of ourselves if we find this really bloody difficult. So if we can kind of be kinder to ourselves and maybe let go of some of the judgment, there is huge support out there, and we just want you to know that you're not alone in this.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful, really important thing to learn. So wherever you are, if you're listening to this, you're getting a massive virtual hug from me and Mel. Okay, you can do this. And along with virtual hugs, what are some really practical things that we could do to ensure that even if we're at the bottom of the list for a while, the practical things that we can do that just keep ourselves supported? Mine is water and sleep, I think, will be two of the things. So even if your days feel overwhelmingly long, getting consistently to bed at the same time and getting up at the same time every morning, and not drifting. It's really easy in the winter to kind of switch the telly on for coziness and company, and then 3 hours later you're suddenly looking at your clock and wondering what's going on. But actually setting yourself an alarm for bedtime and creating lovely cozy sleep rituals can sometimes be a really good way to ensure that you get the sleep that you need to restore your body and brain in order to cope with the next day. So sleep and drink water would be two of my top tips.
It's going back to basics. I would absolutely agree. That's like in those moments where you kind of, you don't know what to think and don't even know what day of the week it is or who you are. It's like back to basics. So it is. I'm the same with sleep. Sleep affects everything else for me. Sleep, hydration, and eat.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that I come across again and again when we are spreading ourselves too thinly, that we are not feeding ourselves enough or regularly enough, because those other things take priority over us. But for our body to function and to have the capacity to think and build our emotional resilience, we have to have the energy coming into our body. Now, I'm not here to judge. I don't, to be honest, it's like, it doesn't necessarily matter what it is. Like some food is better than no food. So, you know, we can talk about the other elements of food choices at another time, but those absolutely are the fundamentals. If you can build those as your foundation, then you've got a stronger starting point to then address the other things that you need.
Absolutely. And I think secondarily, I would put getting outside and moving, but sometimes that can feel hard in the winter. And what we don't want to do is to make you feel like you've got to do hard things, but just that you can do very gentle, nourishing things to support yourself in the sandwich years.
And I think, it's sometimes when the like the colder winter months are more isolating, it's looking at ways in which you can maintain your connections in life. Again, that's about making sure your support network is adequate, but for the fun stuff as well, being more creative in how you stay connected to people, because that's one of our basic human needs.
Absolutely, and it really helps in these things. So in summary, the stuffed sandwich years are hard, and it's okay for it to feel hard. You are not Superwoman, you don't need to be, or Superman. Self-care and creating space for yourself are really useful and important tools in order to be able to continue to support all of your dependents. But they don't need to take huge amounts of time if you just don't feel like you've got it. So sleep, hydration, eating, and then maybe getting outside and getting some movement in as well. See if you can find some simple ways to integrate those, and drop either us a line if you feel like you'd like some support on that too.
Yeah, lovely. So, well, our contact details will be attached to the video. We welcome your thoughts, and feel free to share your experiences. If you want to do that privately, you can do. And we will be back for more.
Thank you for
Thanks
listening.
for watching. Bye-bye.
Bye.